Michael Gross, welcome to Leading in the Dark.
Thank you. Looking forward to this.
So you are the Chief Sales Officer at Gross Mechanical. Why don't you tell us what Gross Mechanical is and your path to becoming the Chief Sales Officer?
As the name implies, and my name is Gross as well, it's a family business, third generation family owners. My brothers and I started taking over back in 2008 with one of my brothers as the president then. And then after about 10 years, another one of my brothers took over as the president. And then we've just been following the generational tradition of each generation separating itself as a new version of the company. So my grandfather started off as Gross Inc. Predominantly, he was estimation and project management. And this was after he had spent a large portion of his career running another company for somebody else as well. My father came into the company and essentially eventually separated himself from Gross Inc. and created Gross Mechanical Contractors, where it was project management, it was estimation, but he started to direct hire the labor, started doing the field installs ourselves. And also at the same time, that's when he started going into the more industrial side of things. But that was about the same time as when the utility companies like Ameren were really starting to go hot and heavy into a lot of their generation units and things like that. So there was an opportunity there that wasn't quite as saturated with the commercial contractors that we were seeing at the time. Fast forward to my brothers and I stepping into our roles, and essentially that led to us acquiring the location that we're in now downtown, south of Anheuser-Busch, south of Millipore-Sigma, just across the street from Millipore-Sigma, actually, off of President and Broadway. And we started focusing more on the fabrication services. We identified the fact that my father figured this out too, but we identified the fact that if we can fabricate more in the shop and minimize the activities in the field, one, we're reducing our risk on a project, and two, we're saving a lot of cost for the clients as well. You still have to identify what we refer to as the outs, the locations where we have some flexibility for the installation in case there is a Murphy's Law event where an elevation is blown or pipe's not in the right location or the tie-ins, different things like that. So yeah, now we are Gross Mechanical Contractors, Gross Mechanical Inc. And we have, I think, technically one of the largest, if not the largest, pipe fabrication shops in the St. Louis area and in the region around us as well. We're right around 55,000 square feet under hook, and we can handle anywhere from our smallest pipe, which you can get pipe down to the 1/4 inch, you can do tubing, you can do flex hose piping, anything like that, all the way up to, I think the largest that I've seen in our shop is 60 inch. And if I confirm with one of my brothers, they'd probably tell me we probably went up to 72 inch at some point too. It's just how you handle it more than anything else.
What does that term under the hook mean?
Under the hook means literally we have overhead cranes in our shop. So we have track that runs throughout the shop that allows us to pick up loads of material safely, of course, and transport it from one side to the other. It's not a grid work where the crane can move left and then move forward or anything like that, but we can move laterally with the crane loads, with the overhead cranes themselves, to facilitate the handling of the material and the piping and the fabrication. When we've had 3 locations for our shop at our offices. Originally, we were in Pagedale, then we moved to Maplewood, and then now we're downtown. When we moved to our Maplewood location, when the material came in for us, we essentially had to stop our operations that were going on because sometimes the movement of the material was causing operations to be affected by it. With the location that we're in now, we've been able to do Kaizen improvements, the 5S improvements, lean. We've been able to apply the various different theories to improve production and improve costs without the additional handling of material and things like that. So, for example, we've got our shop set up in such a way that all the material comes in through one location on the east side and leaves on the west side. So that way we're reducing our double handlings, triple handlings of material. We're able to sequence the activities to such a way that it allows for the sequential progression of fabrication, whether that's simply just a cutting activity, a welding activity, a testing activity, NDE, which stands for non-destructive examination. That's your x-rays, your ultrasound testing, your mag particle testing, the various different NDEs per the ASME standards that we have to follow.
This sounds like a fairly sophisticated operation. Can you help me understand better what's the actual product that you're delivering? What type of projects do you work on?
So the best way to describe it is unless you're in an industrial environment where you see the piping that's exposed, you see the pressure vessels, you see the equipment, we take care of pretty much everything that's behind the scenes of a facility. The guts, for lack of a better term. The best way to put it is to say that we work on the guts of the facilities that we work in. So we work in power plants, we work in waste treatment facilities, refineries, chemical plants, anything that ultimately has some kind of raw product, raw material come in and a finished product leaving. So pretty much anything that's got pressurized piping associated with it or gravity fed piping for that matter, we can pretty much handle just about any kind of fabrication that's required for the installation of those services. And then if we can't technically handle it, we've got the partnerships in place that we either make introduction or we sub those activities under us as well. It just depends on what the situation requires. But ultimately, we focus on the piping and the steel side of things, but we handle steel, we handle carbon steel, stainless steel, the exotics like Inconel, Hastelloy, Manel, plastic pipes, fiberglass pipes. We do aluminum, copper, stainless steel tubing, flex hose, take your pick. Whatever's needed essentially is what it comes down to.
What geographies do you serve?
So field activities wise, we predominantly focus on the Midwest region. But at the same time, we've never had to travel and hunt for work. We do travel for the work, but at the same time, it's predominantly when a client requests us to. For example, we had finished up a project for Anheuser-Busch here, and because of the success of that project, they asked us to go out to California and take a look at almost the exact same project, but in a different facility for them. Now, in that situation, it was a little bit of a different case just because Anheuser-Busch here is a historic brewery, whereas in California, it was a much more modern one, but it was still one of those that they requested us to take a look at the work and give them an estimate for the work and provide not just a post-mortem on what we did in St. Louis, but also ideas and strategies on how to improve the execution of the project too.
And I'm just imagining at some point, the distance from your facility, the travel costs and time and getting labor to some radius outside of St. Louis just makes it not feasible.
And that's the upfront conversation that we've had with all of our clients is we're happy to take a look at things for you, but there has to be a lower limit to make it feasible for us to actually do the work for them. And at the same time, we also identify the fact that we believe that we have better success on project execution by utilizing local contractors, local organizations. And what I mean by that is we fabricate, we install, but at the same time, like we, for example, let's say we've got a project in Decatur, Illinois. We have relationships with the local workforce there. However, at the same time, we still feel like bringing in a local contractor that we're familiar with or that the local craft is familiar with as well, we have a much better success probability in terms of executing the project and things like that, if that makes sense.
It does.
Yeah.
You mentioned incorporating Kaizen and lean methodologies in your operation. How core is that to your culture?
Constant improvement is always part of the conversation that we have. And we went through the process with the various different consultants in order to better facilitate the workstations that our men and women in our shop use each day in, day out. So while we have dedicated locations, the stations, workstations for the cutting activity, for the tack up activity, for the weld out activity, for hydro testing or pressure testing in that case, and NDE, we still allow for a certain amount of adjustability and adaptability to accommodate the actual demands and tasks that we face. Whether it's a misnomer, a misconception, or anything like that, we're not a manufacturer per se. We're more of a fabricator just because we don't produce the same widget day in and day out. We perform the same tasks, but not the same product each day. So in that sense, that's the reason why I distinguish between a fabricator and a manufacturer, just because We do design builds, we do EPC projects, plan specs, take your pick on the situation, things like that. We do one-offs, we do repetitive processes, and it just depends on the contract and the project at hand. But then we also do constructability review in order to identify the potential value engineering or cost savings that could be had if we approach something a little bit differently.
There's a couple companies in St. Louis that are really well known for having a culture of continuous improvement. So Cambridge is one of them, if you know them. The Gund Company is another, and they're very open about letting other people come in and see their process. I'm curious, like, what was the spark that really got you all down this path of continuous improvement and Kaizen activities?
Honestly, it was predominantly related to the amount of overhandling that we had with respect to how we were performing our tasks in the shop originally, back in when we were in Maplewood. Just because we had so much lost time or wasted time or unaccounted time during our process and our sequencing that we started to figure out that if we started having those conversations with the people that were performing the tasks, if we started to do the time studies and figuring out how long it actually legitimately needed to take to perform the task that we were tracking and estimating, we started to figure out that if we tweak something here, tweak something there, and see how it turns out, and not necessarily doing too many things at one time, we could improve our processes and thereby also improving our labor rates, improving our competitiveness, and make us have that much more of an edge over our competition.
What was the reaction like from your employees when you first started this journey? It seems like it's probably a lot of change coming their way. How did you lead them through this?
The general consensus when dealing with change is nobody likes change. I'm very much stuck in my own ways, as I'm sure you are, and I'm sure as everybody else is. But we ultimately explained, we went into the weeds of things. We went into the details and understanding and explaining and understanding why we're trying to do it and what we believe we're going to accomplish. Once we got that kind of understanding and buy-in, and the fact that we're not trying to reduce time on the floor or really change up how they're actually doing the work, we started gaining a lot more traction, a lot more understanding, and a lot more buy-in on the activities and the processes. And getting the buy-in both from the people doing the work as well as their peer leadership also helped push it along as well.
And how long did that take? Because I'm sure you have the same feeling as I do. People in our roles, like we want and expect these things to go like instantly because we see the big picture. So did this go fast or take forever for you all?
I don't think it's ever technically done
Right.
per se. That's the catch-22 of it all, is there's always room for improvement. The what is it? The rule of a half, or whatever the whatever you want to call it, where every time you take half of it, you take half of it, you take half of it. You
Yep.
never quite approach zero. You never quite approach your end goal, but you get closer and closer to it every time. So that being said, it took a little bit of trial and error to get the ball rolling. But with that, we've now been able to promote the culture and the conversation, the two-way conversation of both our apprentices, our journeymen, our foremen, general foremen. They all feel empowered to speak up and say, can we try it this way? And it all requires a conversation. It's saying, let me run the numbers, or let's walk through it in the hypothetical situation, as opposed to actually physically performing the task that way and see if it actually does make sense. There's always a time and place for it, but sometimes you're on a schedule-driven task that you need to get it done, unfortunately, and you just say, look, I see the value of it. We need to do it this way, but once we're done with this, let's look at it again. And we'll take the time and evaluate it and figure out if it actually works that way or not, or if we have to stick with what we've been doing for the last umpteen times, years.
Having an environment where employees feel free and safe to speak up, ask questions, make suggestions is super important. Do you do anything very specifically and intentional to maintain that?
I grew up in our company. You If you really want to get in the nitty gritty and things like that, I'm pretty sure you could probably find old graffiti from me when I was a toddler in our shop sort of situation. But because of how my brothers and I grew up in the shop and how long we've had employees with us for, we've been able to develop relationships. We've been able to develop the rapport with the men and women that we employ. And it's gaining that trust, gaining that relationship, but then also making yourself accessible to them anytime and every time. I spent from 2012 to 2022 working out of an oil refinery. I had a on-site staff with me, and then we had a workforce that ranged anywhere from, on average, 30 up to over 100 craft heads. And I would get to that location by 5 a.m. and I wouldn't leave until 5 p.m. or sometime around there. And for me, the reason why I did that was, one, between 5 and 7 a.m., I was able to do predominantly work that didn't have interruptions. And then same deal at the end of the shift, like around 3:30 or so, I was able to jump back into what I needed to work on. But then between the hours of, say, 7 and 3:30 or whatever the work shift was for the day, I made myself available to both the clients that we had on those projects, but then also the internal and the external clients is the best way to put it. So the men and women that I had working for me out there knew that I was there on site for them to facilitate the work and make sure that they had everything that they needed it and wanted to continue progressing along. I guess it's a roundabout way of saying servant leadership, but it's just ultimately one of those that, even though I'm not in that refinery anymore, I work out of an office downtown that, to this day, I close my door every once in a while to take care of a couple of things, but I've got a large pane of glass in the door that everybody can see whether I'm actually working on something or they can knock on it. They know that regardless of whether my door is closed, I still will have somebody sit down with me and discuss and whatnot and things like that. Everybody's a little bit different in terms of what they need. Some people are self-starters, some people require a little bit of push, and some people just need a routine check-in. And it's ultimately catering to the individual while also still maintaining the overall culture of the conversation.
I often hear from second or third generation family members that are in the business that, coming from the generation before us, there's pretty strong expectations that you're going to work harder and longer than anyone else. Is that in line with the expectations put on you?
Oh yeah, if I show up 5, 10 minutes later than what I normally do, this isn't meant to be derogatory, but I get told that I've got banker's hours. And since you weren't at the award ceremony, you didn't see me on the video or anything like that. The sacrifice that I make day in and day out is I leave my house by 5 a.m. I'm at our office by 5:30, 6 o'clock, depending on which route I take. Our shop opens up around, depending on the work shift, either 6 a.m. or 7 a.m. So I start my day with the guys that are physically performing the work that I'm estimating or that their team is bringing in for the projects and the contracts that we have and the ongoing work or the change orders or whatever the day requires. And just in doing so, I think it just maintains that constant conversation and that openness that continues to drive us forward.
This is always funny to me because we all have very similar stories, but it always struck me as the generation before us, it's as if they value more the number of hours that you're there rather than what you actually do, right? So it's better for you to be there from 5 to 5 than if you worked for 6 hours a day and landed a $10 million deal.
Yeah.
I don't
Yeah.
care. Were you there at 5?
And that's the thing that I think, to your point, that's been one of the harder things to both distinguish and identify, just because depending on how somebody views the situation, like you just said, the people that know me, the employees that know me, they know that if I'm not in by a certain time, I hope they know that something either has happened or I'm out on a job site or something like that. But the whole razzing that occurs with me, even though I'm an owner, it's not so much that I allow it. They know that I've got enough humor in me that I just roll with it and let it and just keep it going and things like that. Ultimately, in the end, results are important, but at the same time, if you don't have a good relationship with the people that are working for you, working with you, then in the end, you're not going to have support and cohesion and that one team mentality. I can just, yesterday in our office, there was an internal meeting, and afterwards, a couple of people came to my office that one person was having a Coke and somebody made just an off the cuff comment, joke about the person drinking a Coke, and he literally crumpled up the can, threw it on the ground, and stormed out, like jokingly, granted, jokingly, like it was all in good humor, but afterwards, like you hear me screaming down the hall saying, "This is why we have ants." And literally, you have 3 or 4 people literally just breaking up down laughing. It's granted, it's one of those sort of situations is without the kind of culture that we currently have, it wouldn't be fun and we wouldn't have the people that work for us continue to work for us. Ultimately, what's great about what we do is we can point to a facility, we can point to a fabrication, we can point to a physical object and say, that's ours. I was a part of that. That is a huge, not just an ego booster, but that is a huge thing, I think, for anybody to have a physical object that they were a part of, that they produced, and can literally take pride in. It's just having that kind of recognition internally, externally, being able to not figure things out, but being able to take pride in what you do is a very big thing, in my opinion, a very big motivator.
And particularly in the trades, right? Because you're producing physical thing. You can drive your kids by and say, I was part of doing that. That's a pretty awesome thing.
Yeah, most definitely. Look, I think no matter what, everybody has to take pride in what they do. If you're a coder, then the elegance of the code is what you're ultimately looking for, besides the functionality of the code. But there's a certain amount of coding is a very esoteric thing where if you're not familiar with it, then it just looks like a bunch of jumble, unfortunately. But at the same time, it can still be appreciated. Being able to take a look at a boiler or a pump system and see similarly the elegance of the routing or the quality of the weld connections or the more subtle details of, for example, a flange makeup where everything is perfectly aligned or within a thousandth of an inch or things like that. That kind of level of pride and visibility is just absolutely incredible. And being able to drive by a refinery, a chemical plant, a water treatment plant, or a greenfield construction project, a brownfield construction project, and physically not just see your name on a banner, but being able to point to a physical piece of pipe or a piece of equipment, or for the civil contractors, a concrete form or anything like that. And again, being able to say that's mine is huge, in my opinion.
I don't want to lose the family business thread, but
Yeah.
I'm curious on your whole thoughts around what did the labor pool look like for you? I'm sure it's extremely challenging. And tie in the whole thread of we push everybody to go get a 4-year degree and $250,000 in debt, and we don't really promote going into trades anymore. Tell me your thoughts about all of that.
So we're a union contractor. So we have the luxury of being able to make a call to the local business agent or to our internal people that act as liaison between the union and ourselves and say, I need 14 new hires, and then break it down in terms of a welder, a fitter, a rigger, a tubing specialist, an instrumentation fitter, things like that. And it's then just waiting on the feedback in terms of what we can get provided to us, whether it's going to be a local guy, a traveler from out of town, or anything like that. But going back to the original question, it's a busy world out there. There's not a lot of available craft resources right now from what we're seeing. Now, granted, that being said, there's always a new class of apprentices that are being brought in each year that ideally, as you get workforce that retires eventually and things like that, you've got the new workforce that's coming into its place. And the idea, something that we do is we always try to pair experience with inexperience. So that way you do have that knowledge transfer. That way you do have that conversation. That way you don't have the knowledge loss of 30, 40 years of experience without having that handoff. But at the same time, not just with the craft workforce, there's still a bit of a shortage when it comes to the engineers, with the project managers, with the other support positions as well, in terms of staffing and administration, things like that. So we're always on the lookout for new and more people to fill the roles that we need as we continue to grow as well. The other thing about it is with respect to the traditional 4-year schooling versus trade schools and things like that. I've seen firsthand with the craft employees that we have exactly what kind of quality can be produced with trade school, with the union apprenticeship programs, with all of that. And I'm a firm believer that the more skills that you can obtain, the more versatile you'll be, the more attractive you'll be to an employer as well. But then at the same time, it's also just acknowledging, like I think you're alluding to, that the 4-year classical approach of going to university is not necessarily for everybody. Whether you do community college or whether you do university or whether you do trade school or jump directly into the union apprenticeship program, education is education. So it's really just how it continues to develop and evolve. And the fact that with the types of projects that we are currently seeing, the infrastructure improvements, the new facility improvements, the renovations, the build outs, the new technologies that are constantly being improved, invented, there's always going to be a demand for the people, the education, the different education that's required for the tasks. We've had pipe fitters that have had classical degrees as well. They just didn't like what they were doing and they went into the local union and applied for the apprenticeship program. That sort of evolution and process in terms of going down one route and going down a completely different route later on is not just specific to the construction industry or anything like that. I know when I was still in school, before I switched over to engineering, I was actually in a medical program that the docent doctor I was following had spent his career in marketing and then decided to become a geriatrician and became the head of a geriatrician program. The point is, I believe education is important. And at the same time, you have to find what drives you and what gives you energy to continue doing what you want to do day in and day out.
Just to hop back to the family business thread, if you're comfortable sharing some of it, I'm curious, how was the transition between your father and your brothers? Was it, you guys have been talking about it for years and it just happened, or smooth, not smooth? How'd it go?
I think all things considered, it was pretty smooth. You're ultimately going from one owner, my father at the time, to 4 owners. So in terms of the transition, it was the 4 brothers coming together and deciding who was going to be president, who had the drive, who had the vision for the next however many years to steer the company greater heights.
That sounds like an easy conversation among 4 brothers.
It definitely required a couple of family trips and family outings to solidify the full plan. But even at that, it's still understanding that everything doesn't always go as planned, and you always have to have the ability to pivot or to stay the course if you absolutely needed to. And I think the transition from my father to my brothers and me was a relatively easy one. And even to this day, during our family dinners and our family events where all the families come together, and there's 4 boys in my family, like my brothers and me, no girls for our generation. So it's the sister-in-laws and then the grandkids now and things like that. But the point I'm getting at is brunch talk, lunch talk, breakfast talk, dinner talk still revolves around the business to a certain degree. We talk about sports, we talk about intramural activities, we talk about how everybody's growing up, but ultimately we still have conversations about how the business is doing or did you ever get this resolved? Or
You can't separate them.
no, you can't. And not, it's just part of our genetics. It's what we grew up doing. Even when we were kids and teenagers and having the family dinner around family dinners, business talk was always part of the discussion. Even then, before I was an employee, before I was working in the shop, things like that, I was listening to those conversations. And regardless of whether I had an informed opinion, and at that time, sometimes when I was younger, a wanted opinion, I still gave an opinion. And every once in a while, I would get that actually makes sense.
It's
And
nice to
then
get those wins.
every once in a while, and then you fast forward to now, where now my brothers and I, two of my brothers have exited the company. So now it's down to one brother and myself steering and running the company as owners. We still have those conversations. We still have those ongoing discussions and what ifs and pivot discussions and staying the course and understanding those sort of details.
Did you all use an external resource to help you through the transition
So
and identifying who is ideal for what role?
throughout the years, we've employed different consultants. I think the topic of succession had always been part of that discussion, but at the same time, I don't believe it was necessarily the focus of the consultant's objectives. The best way to put it is, with the help of the consultant, we were always able to identify the strengths and weaknesses of each of us. And the good news is my strengths aligned with the weaknesses of my brothers and vice versa. Their strengths aligned with my weaknesses. So we were always able to establish running lanes that way. And in doing so, it has helped from stepping on each other's toes. In business, there's always stress. In family business, there's always stress. But being able to maintain those running lanes and understand the dichotomy of viewing things as an employee and viewing things as an owner, and being able to ask questions both as an employee and as an owner, I think has helped us to continue to progress, just because the statistics of a family business transitioning from first generation to second generation, while higher than the statistics of transitioning from second to third, is still not very high, all things considered. That being said, though, we've been able to make it work by utilizing different strategies at each bend, more or less. And then with this year, it's all about internal improvements and upgrades and things like that. It's identifying what needs to be done and when, and continuing to progress without losing your core strengths.
Do you or have you ever had a board or an advisory board?
Short answer is no. We've always, so the way we are structured is our board is more or less the owners in that sense. We elect a president, and then ultimately we have the required meetings in order to maintain information communication, as well as to stay informed in terms of the initiatives that are being put forth and progressed.
Yeah, the reason I asked is I've seen a lot of family businesses that have been successful in transferring between the generations will use an advisory board typically. So not a true fiduciary board, but an advisory board of external people to help the family navigate everything that's going on.
And I think while Gross Mechanical hasn't had a board itself in that sense, I think each of us has had a support group that would meet that kind of need. Whether it's the professional networking or anything like that, or it's a group of owners or anything. There's so many different organizations out there nowadays that you can diversify your network while at the same time getting the kind of support and discussion that you're also needing at the same time, with the confidentiality oftentimes of a board conversation too.
Sure. And imagine you're referring to things like Vistage or EO or YPO, all of those types of things. Yeah,
Yep.
those support networks are, I would say, essential for
Yeah.
folks in these roles.
There's so many different organizations out there nowadays. Going back to my comment about differentiating between fabricators and manufacturers, even going to organizations like that focus predominantly on manufacturing still gives a decent amount of insight and not necessarily opportunity, but outside perspective that while the details of the task might be a little bit different in terms of how to handle the situation is very similar, very common, kind of what you were saying very early on.
So you mentioned running around the place since you were a very young kid. What was your first real job in the business?
Sweeping.
That's a good place to start, right?
So my parents believed early on the best way to learn is by doing. So quite literally, the moment that we were able to essentially around high school age, we were able to start working in our shop, working at the direction or under the supervision of the shop foreman or the warehouse manager and expediter, performing similar tasks to that of a pre-apprentice in the union apprentice program, getting exposure to the various different tasks and being able to ask questions and just constantly learning and gaining an understanding on what work ethic is. And in doing so, not only did we develop the knowledge base and understanding of what it takes to do what we do, we've also been able to develop the relationship with the people that we work with and that work for us to such an extent that we know each other's kids, we know each other's grandkids, that sort of incredible relationship. It's a pretty incredible thing to have and be able to say that I've seen two, if not three generations of the same family coming through the business.
Yeah.
It's absolutely incredible.
It is incredible. So do you have kids? And if so, are they running around the place?
So my wife and I have two kids. One is graduating college next week, and the other one is 3 years old. So we've got the broad spectrum, the bookends of the next generation.
You sure do.
Now, yeah, so it's a pretty incredible thing, all things considered. And Lexi is graduating from Purdue next week in, I believe, agricultural business and marketing specialty. And she has secured an awesome job in Cincinnati. And so next week she graduates. The week of Memorial Day, we're moving her up. And then, this is a horrible way to say it, then she's on her own. But she through her hard work, through her efforts, has secured an absolutely incredible job. And both my wife and I are looking so forward to seeing how far she's able to climb and evolve into the businesswoman that she wants to be. And then, yeah, I've got a 3-year-old boy that everybody that meets him thinks he's adorable, but then everybody also says that he's got the mind of an engineer. He loves to tinker. He loves to push buttons, both literally and figuratively. And he is just a ball of absolute energy. He's getting into t-ball. He's getting into sports. His ability to learn and adapt is absolutely incredible to me.
That's awesome.
And he's not afraid. He's not afraid to try things, which is even better.
Yeah. Congratulations on all of that. That's pretty cool.
Thank you. Thank you. How about yourself?
I have a 5th grade boy and a 2nd grade girl, and we coach all their sports. And you know how it is. Kids are my life. That's all I do.
Yeah.
So I really appreciate you sharing a lot of these insights. I'm always fascinated by family business. Is there any concluding thought you'd like to share or be sure that we pull from this discussion?
No, I'm horrible with names, but I've listened to a handful of the other podcasts so far. I feel like a small fish in a big ocean listening to the different people that you've talked with through the Leading in the Dark series. Talking with Alan Bulmer and August Felker and Brian Wilcox, and just the experiences and the knowledge base and just the insights that they've been able to provide through your conversations have been absolutely incredible to listen to. It just re-sparks with me that it's a never-ending quest to continue to evolve and grow, and you're never quite finished is the best way to put it.
thank you for those kind words, but I appreciate your modesty. Leadership is hard, and I totally agree with you. You never master it or never stop learning. So I get a lot of enjoyment out of talking with folks like yourself. So I really appreciate you taking the time to share your stories.
No, yeah, happy to and appreciate it. This is the first time we're actually meeting face to face and talking and things like that, as opposed to via email. I definitely appreciate and have been looking forward to this for a while. So appreciate the opportunity and
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Michael.
thank you.